So in Daniel's vision, hundreds of years before the advent of Christ, there's an ancient one seated on a flaming throne. Around him are members of the court, and they're keeping a record of everything from the beginning of time, and writing them all in this great book for the judgment of the living and the dead. And one like a human being coming from the clouds of heaven is presented to the Ancient One. He is given everlasting dominion so that all peoples, languages, and nations should serve him. And in John's vision, Jesus Christ is named as the one who has dominion over all things, from the beginning of time to its end, because he is the Alpha and the Omega. He is also the firstborn of the dead, meaning the first resurrected. And he is ruler of all the kings of the earth. Through his love we are freed, we are granted citizenship in heaven, we are appointed to be priests serving his God and Father. And one day, Revelation tells us, every eye will see him coming on the clouds, even the ones who pierced him. And on his account, all tribes will wail. Wail. I've heard people get choked up and sniffle and struggle to hold back tears. I've heard people sob, and I've heard people sob uncontrollably. But only once did I ever hear wailing. Loud, uncontrollable wailing, expressing grief so deep that there is no chance of suppressing it for the sake of decorum. Sure, you'll hear crying like that from a small child, but this isn't a kid. These were teenagers. And they were crowded into every room in the funeral home to say goodbye to their friend, a friend who was a hero among them. He'd been a burnout. He got sober. He found his footing. He became the starting quarterback and the captain of the football team. He was on the honor roll. And what made him a hero amongst his peers wasn't any of those things. What made him a hero amongst his peers is that he was going back to the places where he'd found his drugs, finding the people that he once shared life with, and bringing them into sobriety with him. And the power of that testimony and the power of that work to bring them to sobriety is what made him a hero. And the day after Christmas, his car slid after hitting a sheet of black ice and went into a tree. And there was wailing that day. To think that when Jesus comes on the cloud and everyone sees him, to think that there would be thousands, millions, billions of people wailing as they realize the truth of what they've been told, it's difficult to imagine. Yet nearly every religion has some version of this big book where records are kept for the sake of judgment, and someday it will be read. Your record for you, my record for me, and the determination made over every thought, word, and action. Did it honor God, or did it undermine the will of God? And such record keeping is the work of kings. The account that the king tells in these days is the definitive account. The rule of the king is absolute. The ruler of high order, such as Pilate in Jesus' day, he believes that when he acts, he's acting on behalf of the gods. Kings have this feeling, this idea that they are appointed by the divine, and because they are appointed by the divine, what they say goes. So their version of history becomes the definitive version of history. Their judgment on what is good or bad becomes the definitive judgment on what is good or bad. And Pilate, when he is having this conversation with Jesus, Jesus, who is presented to Pilate as a king in chains. Pilate's having a hard time understanding how it is that this person could be a king if he doesn't have the power to control his own story. Kings want to control their stories. They want to make sure that the stories are told to paint them in the most flattering light, that make them look glorious and divine. And kings, because of this, also hold the power of life and death in their hands. Well, not so much life, they can't create it, but they can certainly take it or pardon a person to let them keep it. Kings enjoy this power, and nations claim this power. The king wants it written the way they want it written. When Pilate is faced with Jesus as a king, and he's a king in chains, it's unusual. This is not the usual crazy person caught up in some narcissistic fantasies of divine control that he's used to seeing come into his court claiming to be a king, the nut jobs. Here Jesus has been beaten and he's bloodied and led to him with some trumped up charge of claiming to be a king, but Pilate finds him credible. And that's what makes him stumble. Jesus is engaging him. Jesus is making a claim to be king, but not a king of this world. Not like some cult leader with crazed followers plotting to jailbreak their leader. And Jesus says that he's come as a king to testify to the truth. Truth can be a dangerous thing for kings. To have their version of the story refuted by another undermines their power. And when their power is undermined, they feel threatened. And so now Pilate is curious. This king in chains is saying that he's come to testify to the truth? Could he be presenting a story to refute that which says Pilate has absolute control over the region? Pilate's intrigued, and he wants to know more. As a Roman, there's a certain valor in having the official version of a story be true in its telling. And as a ruler, Pilate understands, it's helpful if the truth is a little malleable, selected, and a bit controlled. Truth has become harder to discern over the decades, hasn't it? Trying to understand what is truth, and who's telling the truth, and who is standing up for the truth. Whatever it is, we want our truth to be definitive. We want our truth to be reliable. We want truth to be unbendable. We want it to be factual. We don't want it to be in service of any person or any group's desired truth. We expect truth to be, in our day and age, the highest level of truth is that which is quantifiable, evidence-based, scientific truth, determined through strict processes and verified through independent peer review. That is our highest level of truth, isn't it? And if you can't get that, the next level just beneath it in the pantheon of what we consider true are recordings of events. Untampered with recordings that clearly show what exactly happened. And if you can't get that untampered with recording that clearly shows everything, then we rely on anecdotes to tell us the truth, to demonstrate what is true. And when we get to the anecdote level, of course, there are things that we know that are true in our heart when we hear somebody talk. There are things that are true in our gut, right? We have all these different ways of discerning truth. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart. All of these levels of truth which we wrestle with nearly every day, from preferred stories to fake stories, from scientific truth to political truth, from anecdotes of like-minded people to the anecdotes of weird people, and the things we know in our gut, the things we know in our heart, all of these are an understanding of truth that is fought over in this world. Because to control the truth is to control the future. This is not the kind of truth Jesus came to give testimony to. The truth that Jesus came to give testimony to is not one that can be measured. It is not one that can be independently repeated. It is not skewed in favor of one to discredit another as may fit one person's perspective. His truth is that death is not the end. Death is not the end. And that is the truth that Jesus came to give testimony to. It is not a truth that is born of this world, because there is nothing in this world that can make that happen. It is a truth that only comes from God. And it is a truth that once you start to embrace it, it begins to erode the power of kings and erode the power of nations, which claim responsibility for writing their own stories and claim responsibility for being able to take the life from another person. If you have a person like Pilate, who is in charge of this realm, and someone comes in and is undermining the work of that realm, Pilate will say this person is a traitor, he is treasonous, and put that person to death, because it is the right and the responsibility of those who rule to maintain their truth. Now, in the pursuit of maintaining their truth, they put Jesus to death. Did it work? For a time. For a couple of days. But when Jesus rises again, and rises in a way that is different, that is a resurrected and glorious body, Jesus takes that power of death and rips it away from the kings and rips it away from the nations and takes it away from the empires to leave the empires with nothing. Am I too loud? All right. Jesus takes it away from the empires, and he takes it away from the kings, and he takes it away from the nations, leaving those empires and nations and kings with nothing to uphold their version of what is true. And yet the nations and the kings and the rulers, they still proclaim death to this person. They still proclaim war over this region, and war is around the world, in Congo and in Yemen, and where drug cartels are warring for control in Central and South America, and it's everywhere. Ukraine, Afghanistan, Israel, Gaza. And Jesus came to testify to a truth that says that death is not the ultimate power in this world. Life and love are. Life and love matter more. He says, I am a king, but I'm not a king of this world. You remember when he's meeting with the disciples, he says, this is after his resurrection, he comes to them and he breathes on them and he says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I don't give as the world gives. I mean, how does the world give? Doesn't it always want something in return? Isn't that the rule of Christmas holiday cards? Only the people who sent you a card last year get the card this year. Only if they reciprocate. But Jesus gives freely out of a love for life. And Jesus calls us, his disciples, to testify to this same truth so that our lives would be ones that are pushing for the life and the well-being of all people, to demonstrate this love for life and to give it freely and generously. And as we learned in Belhar, to do it on the side of those who are oppressed, on the side of those who are wronged, on the side of those who are faced with justice, even if that injustice is codified in some law somewhere. Just because it's a law, it doesn't make it right. Right? It used to be a law that a black person was 3/5 of a person. Is that a right law or an unjust law? It is an unjust law. It used to be a law that women couldn't vote. Is that a right law or an unjust law? Similarly, we have unjust laws today. We who are called to follow Christ are called to follow him even to meetings like that which is with Pilate, and to face those who have the power to force injustice on people and say, I am here to represent a gospel that is for life. And stand on that. Jesus is Lord. Say it with me. Jesus is Lord. Can you put anybody else's name in that phrase? Would you dare to? Don't. Don't. Again, Jesus is Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And thank you for letting me know that it was too loud.